The day my wife was buried, my son-in-law asked me how soon I planned to move out. Not in those words, of course. He never said anything directly. That was never his style. He framed it as concern. "We just want to make sure you're comfortable, Howard. A house this size must be a lot to manage on your own." He put his hand on my shoulder while he said it. I remember thinking his grip felt like a realtor measuring square footage. My daughter Vivian stood behind him and said nothing. I had known Vivian's husband, Derek, for 11 years. In that time, I had watched him quit 3 jobs, start 2 businesses that went nowhere, and borrow money from my wife Carol twice. Money she never told me about until the second time. She wasn't hiding it from me out of deception. She was protecting him from my reaction. That was Carol, always smoothing things over, always believing people deserved one more chance. She believed that about Vivian too, even when Vivian stopped calling for months at a time, even when she only showed up at Christmas with a list of things she wanted and left before the dishes were done. Carol would say, "She's busy, Howard. You remember what it was like being young." I would nod and let it go, because arguing with Carol about Vivian was like arguing with the tide. It didn't move anywhere, and you just ended up wet. Carol was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 14 months before she died. She told me on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee between us, like she was telling me the gutters needed cleaning. She had known for 3 days before she said anything. She spent those 3 days, she told me later, not crying or praying or being afraid. She spent them talking to our attorney. I didn't know that at the time. I only knew about the coffee and the diagnosis and the way the afternoon light came through the window over the sink and made everything look ordinary when nothing was ordinary anymore. We had 41 years together, Carol and I. We built a property management company from a single rental house I bought at 29 with money I saved working double shifts at a lumberyard. By the time Carol got sick, we owned commercial and residential properties across 3 counties in North Carolina. It wasn't glamorous money. It was early mornings and broken furnaces and tenants who paid late and roofs that always seemed to need replacing in February. But it was ours. Every bit of it we built together. Vivian knew the business existed. She never wanted to be part of it. When she was in her 20s, we offered to bring her in, teach her the operations side. She said property management was boring. She wanted to work in fashion. She moved to New York, worked at a boutique for 2 years, then moved back to North Carolina when she met Derek at a mutual friend's wedding. Derek wanted to open a restaurant. Carol and I gave them the seed money. The restaurant lasted 14 months. After that, Derek had ideas. Always ideas. A gym franchise. An online resale business. A food truck. Vivian worked part-time at a dental office and came home to Derek's ideas. I don't know if she believed in them or if she had simply decided that believing in them was her role. Either way, by the time Carol got sick, they were renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Raleigh and making payments on a truck that was too expensive for their income. Carol knew all of this. She was more clear-eyed about it than I ever gave her credit for. The last 8 months of her life, she had a series of meetings I wasn't fully aware of. She told me she was handling paperwork, updating accounts, getting everything organized. I was focused on her treatment schedule, her medications, driving her to appointments at Duke 3 times a week. I wasn't paying attention to the paperwork. I should have asked more questions. But watching the person you've loved for 4 decades navigate chemotherapy takes up most of the space in your mind. There isn't much room left for documents. Carol died on a Thursday morning in late October. It was raining. She had been in hospice for the last 3 weeks, and in those weeks she had said most of what she needed to say to me. We had the kind of conversations you put off for years because you assume there's more time. We talked about the lumberyard and the first rental house and the night Vivian was born, and a road trip we took to Montana in 1997 that neither of us had thought about in years. She held my hand a lot. She slept a lot. She did not tell me what was in the documents. 2 weeks after the funeral, our attorney, a man named Charles Briggs, who had handled our legal affairs for over 20 years, called and asked if I could come in. He said he also needed Vivian to be present. I called Vivian, and she said she and Derek would both come. I didn't ask why Derek needed to be there. I was still moving through everything slowly, the way you do when grief sits on your chest like something heavy. We met in Charles's office on a Wednesday at 10 in the morning. The office is in a brick building downtown, dark wood paneling, the kind of place that has been there long enough that it smells like history. Charles sat behind his desk, and Vivian and Derek sat to my left. I sat slightly apart from them, which wasn't intentional. That's just how the chairs were arranged. Charles thanked us for coming. He said he knew this was a difficult time. Then he opened a folder and began to explain what Carol had done. She had restructured everything. 18 months before she died, when she first received the diagnosis, Carol had worked with Charles to dissolve our jointly held assets and establish a revocable trust. The trust was called the Whitfield Family Trust. At the time of its creation, she was the primary trustee, but the documents specified that upon her death, trusteeship transferred to me, not to Vivian. To me. All of it. The properties, the investment accounts, the operating capital from the business. Everything was held inside the trust. The trust had a named beneficiary for distributions after my death. That beneficiary was a land conservation non-profit based in Asheville that Carol had discovered through a magazine article 2 years before she got sick. She had been donating small amounts to them for years without mentioning it to me. She loved the idea of land being protected. Permanently. She used to say the people came and went, but land remembered. There was also a provision for Vivian. A specific, limited provision. During my lifetime, the trust would distribute a monthly amount to Vivian, enough to cover reasonable living expenses, the figure adjusted annually for inflation, on the condition that she maintain regular, meaningful contact with me. The definition of meaningful contact was written into the document. In-person visits at least once per month. Phone calls at least twice per week. No provision was made for Derek at all. If Vivian failed to meet the conditions, the distributions stopped. If she contested the trust, she was removed from it permanently. Charles read all of this in a measured, unhurried voice. He had the manner of someone who had delivered difficult news often enough that he no longer added unnecessary softness to it. He just read the words. Vivian was quiet through most of it. Derek was not. He interrupted twice. The first time to ask whether the trust could be challenged. Charles explained the grounds on which trusts could be contested in North Carolina and made clear that Carol had taken specific steps to ensure the document reflected her sound mind and full volition, including a letter from her physician dated the day before signing and a video recording of the signing itself. Derek asked about the video. Charles said it was maintained in secure storage. The second time Derek interrupted was to ask whether I, as trustee, could choose to distribute assets differently. Charles said that as trustee, I had discretionary authority within the scope defined by the document, but that I was bound by fiduciary duty and that any deviation from the stated terms would require court approval. Derek looked at me when Charles said that. I looked back at him and didn't say anything. Vivian asked one question toward the end. She asked why her mother had done it this way instead of simply leaving things to her outright. Her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it. Not sadness, something more like recalibration, the sound of someone adjusting to new information. Charles said that was a question only Carol could answer, but that in his experience, clients who chose structured arrangements of this kind did so because they wanted to protect relationships as much as assets. Vivian nodded once, slowly, and didn't say anything else. Derek said, on the way out of the building, that they were going to look into their options. I drove home alone. The house felt very large and very quiet. I heated up something from the refrigerator and sat at the kitchen table where Carol had told me about the diagnosis 14 months before, and I thought about what it meant that my wife had done all of this without telling me, and the more I thought about it, the more I understood that she hadn't been hiding it from me. She had been handling it. There is a difference. Carol had spent 41 years handling things quietly, and this was the last thing she handled. She did it well. I called Charles the next morning and asked him to walk me through everything again, this time just the two of us. I needed to understand what I was now responsible for, and I needed to understand it without anyone else in the room. For the next 3 weeks, I heard nothing from Vivian. Not a call, not a text. I told myself she needed time. I had needed time too. Grief doesn't keep a schedule, and I tried to extend the same patience to her that I would have wanted for myself. But I noticed the silence. I noticed it the way you notice a sound that has stopped. Our house had been quiet since Carol died, but Vivian's silence had its own particular texture. On a Sunday in late November, she came to the house. Alone, no Derek. She brought a bag of groceries, which surprised me. She put them on the counter and started unpacking them without asking, and I watched her arrange cans in the pantry and thought about all the years I had wished she would just drop by, just act like this house was still partly hers. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee. The same table. I wondered if she thought about that too. She said she was sorry for not calling. She said things had been difficult. I said I knew. She asked how I was managing the properties. I told her I had good people in place, the same manager who had worked with us for 9 years, and that the business was running the way it always had. She asked if I had thought about simplifying things. Selling some of the commercial holdings, maybe. Reducing the complexity. I recognized what she was doing. She was not wrong that simplification was sometimes wise. But the timing of the suggestion, coming 3 weeks after the will reading, with Derek's voice somewhere underneath it, I recognized it. I told her I was comfortable with things as they were, for now, and I'd changed the subject. She visited twice more in December. The visits were careful, a little formal, the way conversations are when both people are aware that something important is circling just outside what's being said. She asked about the properties again on the second visit, more directly. She said Derek had been talking to a commercial real estate broker. She said it might make sense to consolidate. I said I would keep that in mind. In January, she stopped visiting again. February was quiet. I filled my time the way I had always filled time, maintenance calls, reviewing financials, long walks in the neighborhood where Carol and I had walked together for years. I joined the grief support group at the church, which was not something I would have done before, but Carol had always said I kept too much inside, and I was trying to change that. The group met on Tuesday evenings, and the people there were kind. In March, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Derek. He spoke for a long time. He had clearly prepared what he wanted to say. He talked about their financial situation, which was worse than I had known. He said Vivian was stressed that it was affecting their marriage. He said that as her father, as someone who had always provided for the family, I must understand that it was important for them to have stability. He said he thought my wife, he called her Carol, which for some reason irritated me, would have wanted Vivian to be secure. I let him finish. Then I said that I thought Carol had made clear what she wanted and that the trust she had established was the expression of that. He said the trust wasn't fair. He said Vivian was Carol's only child and that leaving everything to a land conservation organization was the kind of decision people made when they weren't fully thinking through the consequences. I said that Carol had been many things in her life, but she had never once failed to think through consequences. Derek said they were consulting with an attorney. I said that was their right. We didn't speak again after that. In April, Vivian called. It was the first time she had called in 2 months. She was crying, which I had not heard in a long time. She said things between her and Derek had gotten bad. She said she didn't know what she wanted anymore. She said she missed her mother. I said she missed her mother too. She asked if she could come over. I said yes. She came the next afternoon and we sat outside on the back porch, which was something Carol and I had done every spring when the weather turned. Vivian had brought nothing this time, no groceries, no agenda. She just sat. After a while she said she was sorry. Not for anything specific, just sorry. I understood that. Sometimes sorry doesn't attach to a particular thing. It attaches to a whole period of time. I told her I wasn't angry at her. She said she knew Derek had called me. She said she hadn't asked him to. She said she was tired of the whole situation and that she had asked him to drop the idea of contesting anything. I asked if he had agreed to that. She looked at the yard for a while before she answered. Then she said she wasn't sure what he had agreed to. I nodded. Over the following weeks, Vivian started calling more regularly. The conversations were short at first. Weather, local news, a story about a co-worker at the dental office. But they lengthened gradually. She started asking about the properties, differently than before. Not with an agenda, but the way she used to ask about work when she was a teenager, vaguely curious, a little bored but listening. I told her about a small apartment complex we owned in Durham that had needed a roof last summer. She laughed and said it was always February. I said, actually, this one was July, and she laughed again. She came to Sunday dinner 3 times in May. The 3rd time she came without Derek, and when I asked how he was, she paused a beat too long before she said fine. In June, she told me they were separating. She said it without drama, without placing blame, in the flat tone of someone who had already done the emotional work of the decision and was now just reporting it. I didn't ask for details. I said I was sorry she was going through it, and that I was here if she needed anything. She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her in a long time, possibly since she was very young, like she was actually seeing me. Not the trust, not the properties, not the problem to be solved, just me. She said, "Dad, I need to ask you something." I told her to go ahead. She asked whether, when I was gone, the land trust really got everything. She wasn't asking to contest it. Her voice was different now. Quieter, more careful, the way people ask questions they're actually afraid to hear the answer to. I told her I had met with Charles in January. I told her that within the discretionary authority the trust gave me, I had made some adjustments, not to the principle, not to the conservation organization's eventual inheritance, but to the monthly provisions for her and to a separate educational account I had established for a future grandchild, which was my own addition. She was quiet for a while. Then she said she didn't deserve that. I said maybe not, but her mother had believed in one more chance, even when evidence was thin. I had spent 41 years watching Carol be right about that more often than she had any statistical reason to be. I figured I owed it to Carol to try it at least once myself. Vivian put her face in her hands. She didn't cry for long. She never had been a long crier, even as a child. She composed herself quickly, wiped her eyes, looked up. She asked if she could start coming to the Tuesday grief group with me. I said I would ask if that was allowed. It was. We have been going together for 6 weeks now. We sit in a circle with 9 other people in a room that smells like coffee and old hymnals, and sometimes she talks and sometimes I talk, and sometimes we just listen to someone else describe the specific shape of what they have lost. There is something in that room that I have not been able to name exactly, something that feels like it was there before and got lost, and is now being slowly, carefully recovered. Carol would have known what to call it. She always knew. I have thought a lot about cause and effect since Carol died, not in any mystical way, just the plain mechanical truth of it, that what you put into a life tends to come back around, one way or another, in forms you don't always recognize at first. Carol put 41 years into our marriage. She put patience into Vivian when patience wasn't easy. She put quiet, careful thought into documents that I didn't know existed until after she was gone. None of that was accidental. None of it was passive. That was Carol making choices, one after another, for decades, about who she wanted to be and what she wanted to leave behind. The outcome, the trust, the structure, even the slow and difficult reconciliation between Vivian and me didn't come from luck. It came from all those choices, compounding over time the way interest compounds in an account you keep adding to, even when the balance seems small. What I've come to believe, sitting with all of this, is that character is not something you perform when people are watching. It's something you build when they aren't. Carol built hers in the margins of our life together, in small decisions about how to treat people, how to respond to disappointment, how to hold expectations loosely without abandoning them entirely. I watched her do it for 4 decades, and I still didn't fully see it until she was gone. Vivian is different from who she was a year ago. Not completely different. She still has the impatience her mother always recognized, the tendency to move toward the practical before the emotional. But there is something in her now that wasn't there before, a willingness to sit in discomfort without immediately trying to solve it. I see it in the grief group when she listens to someone else's story without filling the silence. I see it when she comes to Sunday dinner and asks about the properties the way a person asks who is actually curious, not angling for something. That change did not come from the trust structure. It came from what Vivian chose to do after the trust structure told her something she didn't want to hear. She could have followed Derek down the road of attorneys and contests and resentment. She chose not to. That choice belongs entirely to her, and I respect her for it more than I've probably told her. What I want to say to anyone who sees some part of their own life in this story is simply this. The people who raise you are not obligated to protect you from consequences. The most loving thing a parent can sometimes do is allow the structure of reality to teach what words never could. Carol understood that. She understood it better than I did, and she built it into the last thing she ever wrote. Integrity is not what you claim about yourself. It is the accumulation of how you actually behaved across years, when the outcome was uncertain. My wife had it in full. My daughter is building it now, slowly, the way most honest things get built, and I'm trying, in whatever time I have left, to be worthy of the trust, in every sense of that word, that Carol placed in me. That is all any of us can really do.